Hello and welcome to the history of Babylon 5. Today's episode, Ambassador Jakar. Jakar was born in 2201 on the Narn homeworld in the city of Jakamazad during the first Centauri occupation. Like all Narns, Jakar had a different name at birth. Once reaching maturity, he chose the name Jakar because he had embraced the teachings of Jaquan. He would remain a devoted follower for the rest of his life. During the final years of the occupation, Jakar's family worked as slaves in the household of a wealthy Centauri aristocrat and Spoo ranch farmer. The resistance was growing each day, but with Jakar's mother too ill to move, and his father, Jakarn, would not leave her behind to escape into the underground. One day, when Jakar was still young, his father spilled a drink on the mistress of the house. She responded by having him beaten and strung up by his hands to a jawal tree in the yard, leaving him there to die. On the third day, against his mother's orders, Jakar went to him just before he died. His father's last words were a plea for Jakar to remember him and honor his name. That same day, Jakar ran away and killed his first Centauri. Jakar would spend a great deal of time in one bomb shelter or another. Later in life, he would admit to feeling as much at home in a shelter as anywhere else. Jakar joined the resistance and developed his tactical and planning skills during years as a resistance fighter. His reputation was such that reports of his activities reached the Dilgar. After many grueling years of attrition and sabotage, the Narns finally liberated their homeworld in 2231. Over the next 21 years, Jakar rose through the social ranks of the new regime, until in 2251 he was appointed to the Kari, the regime's ruling council. During his time in the Kari, he made his share of political enemies, and by 2258 he claimed to have survived 2 assassination attempts. Among his more powerful enemies was Councillor Durag, whom Jakar managed to humiliate before the council and ruin his family's name. During the Earth-Minbari War, Jakar was the one to broker the deal for humans to buy weapons. He also approached to help mediate a desperate peace negotiations between the two sides. A Narn cruiser brought Jakar and the Earth Alliance officers John Sheridan and Stephen Franklin to an abandoning listening post in the Epsilon system to meet Lenan, a Minbari ranger. However, before negotiations could take place, the Narn ship was destroyed and Lenan was killed when their location was fired upon. Both sides believed a renegade faction from the other was responsible. In reality, it was a Centauri ship, thus ending any chance at peace. Jakar was briefly detained by the Minbari before being released and returned to Narn. The Babylon Project. In 2256, Jakar becomes the Narn ambassador to Babylon 5, a member of the Kari. He is a strong-willed and patriotic supporter of his people and their ideas. At some point before his arrival, he had breathing gills surgically implanted. Shortly after the arrival of Leda Alexander, Jakar proposes that she assist the Narns in acquiring telepaths among their people. Leda turns down the offer. Jakar is also involved with a plot to discredit Babylon 5 commander Jeffrey Sinclair. This plot involves the Narn smuggling a changeling net on board and giving it to a Minbari assassin. The assassin uses the device to frame Sinclair for the attempted murder of Ambassador Kosh of the Vorlon Empire. Just after the ambassador's arrival, Jakar then blackmails Ambassador Londo Mollari with the evidence of his grandfather's activities during the first Centauri occupation of Narn into not voting against the resolution to have Sinclair taken to the Vorlon homeworld for trial. The resolution goes through, but fortunately Sinclair is exonerated and Kosh's life is saved. Jakar also approaches Ambassador Delenn, proposing an alliance against the Centauri on the pretext that Mollari is the attempted assassin of Kosh. When she refuses, he admits to her that his spies have heard rumors about why the Minbari surrendered at the end of the war, mentioning the Grey Council. Delenn responds by briefly torturing Jakar, making him swear never to mention it again and ensuring that he understands where they stand. Throughout the year 2258, Jakar engages in a number of political, covert, and military-related conflicts and intrigue, all designed to weaken the Centauri Republic. Jakar often says that he dreams of a day where the Centauri are completely annihilated. He also develops a bitter, ongoing feud with Ambassador Londo Mollari. G'Kar's anger and hatred towards the Centauri are summarized when he speaks to Commander Jeffrey Sinclair about when all Centauri are dead and we have carved their bones into flutes for little Narn children. And we'll be right back after this. Earlier in the year, the Centauri agricultural planet of Ragish III comes under attack. When details first come in, G'Kar offers his sympathies to Ambassador Mollari, but adamantly denies the Narns have launched an attack. When more data comes in, depicting Narn fighters at the colony, Mollari angrily confronts G'Kar and the Zocalo. G'Kar, knowing full well what has happened, simply quips that the times have changed and the Narns are on the rise. Mollari attempts to physically attack G'Kar, but is restrained by security guards, although the Narn coolly stands his ground. While the Centauri government officially tells Mollari that they will not respond with military force, Mollari hopes to prompt the Babylon 5 General Assembly to act, embarrassing the Centauri Republic into action. G'Kar outmaneuvers him, however, by playing a tape of a coerced confession from Mollari's nephew, who was stationed on Ragish III, explaining that the Narns were invited to come. G'Kar also knows that the Republic does not wish to act. He also moves that the General Assembly take no action against the Narn regime, and the motion passes. Unfortunately for G'Kar, Ambassador Sinclair has engaged and defeated a wing of raiders, with Star Furies from the station. Sinclair uncovers the source of the raiders' weapons, a Narn base, with a Narn military officer. The station also intercepts transmissions proving the attack on Ragish III was unprovoked. Sinclair threatens to expose the evidence unless the Narns withdraw. G'Kar reluctantly agrees to make it happen. G'Kar's first diplomatic acheté is Kodath. Insulted when Ambassador Mollari sends his aide Fir Kato to negotiate the Euphrates Treaty, G'Kar instructs Kodath to fill in for him while Kato is there, growling to her not to give away the homeworld. Kodath is killed shortly thereafter in an apparent airlock malfunction. As Babylon 5 prepares for a week-long series of festivities, celebrating the religious traditions of various races on board, a courier named Tupari arrives with a message for G'Kar. The message is from his old political enemy, Durag, who is dying but has plans to take his revenge on G'Kar. He informs the ambassador that he has hired an assassin from the Many Knives Assassins Guild, who will stalk G'Kar, making him live in fear for 48 hours, and then he will die. Even as the message finishes playing, G'Kar's new aide Na'Toth arrives, making him suspect her immediately. He soon receives a Death Blossom, a gift left by the Many Knives, to their marks. This prompts G'Kar to approach Nagrath and hire a bodyguard, but the guard is quickly murdered by the assassin. Due to certain information pertaining to why his old enemy wanted his death, G'Kar cannot disclose the threat to station security. He confronts the courier who delivered the message, only to find that the courier is in fact the assassin. The assassin takes G'Kar to a secluded part of the station and tortures him with the Pain Giver. Though G'Kar refuses to cry out, he is saved by Na'Toth and gets his revenge against the assassin by making it appear the killer had been bribed, knowing that the Many Knives will now hunt him down. G'Kar is brought in when an Earth corporation wishes to send Catherine Sakai to survey Sigma 957 as a possible source of Quantium-40. The planet is in contested space by the Narn. G'Kar refuses to consent, insisting that the planet is not safe. Sakai accuses the Narn of trying to hold on to Sigma 957 out of spite, as it is too far to use. G'Kar warns her that if she goes over his head and goes to the planet anyways, she will likely not come back. Realizing she will do just that, he arranges for a pair of Narn Phrazy fighters to head to the planet and render assistance to Sakai. She does in fact need assistance when her ship is damaged by the walkers of Sigma 957. Upon her returning to the station, Sakai thanks G'Kar for his assistance. She asks him about what she saw, but he responds that he has as much chance explaining to her what they are as an ant would have explaining to another ant about humans and Narns. When the mass murderer and war criminal Jidur, aka Deathwalker, comes on board the station, G'Kar is upset to learn that Na'Toth brutally attacked her in customs. He apologizes to the commander and she is placed under house arrest in his quarters pending further investigation. Na'Toth proclaims that she has a Narn blood oath against Deathwalker and is honor-bound to carry it out. G'Kar forces her to stand down. However, as he knows that Deathwalker has seemingly created a serum for immortality, Na'Toth's attack disrupts a planned meeting between Jadur and a Narn operative. The attack makes this approach impossible, so it falls to G'Kar. He approaches her and asks her to come to Narn, rather than seek asylum on Earth. Deathwalker says she will agree, but only if G'Kar delivers the head of Na'Toth. Refusing to do so, G'Kar informs the League of Non-Aligned Worlds about her presence, knowing that the races that have been ravaged by Deathwalker will want revenge. During a vote in the General Assembly, he moves that Deathwalker be tried on Narn, but this is rejected. A compromise is finally reached, where the serum would be shared. But the hope of immortality ends when the Deathwalker's ship is destroyed by the Vorlons. And we'll be right back after this. G'Kar is approached at this time by Tharng and Mola. G'Kar, who had never even heard of their race until they came to him, is completely uninterested in giving any assistance, as they have nothing to offer in terms of strategic alliance. When Earth President Luis Santiago is scheduled to arrive on the station for a conference, G'Kar is insulted that the Narn delegation is seated next to the Vree at the banquet. According to G'Kar, watching them eat, that's horrifying for you. When Michael Garibaldi is framed for planting a bomb on board the station, one of his suspects for the frame-up is G'Kar. G'Kar proves he is not to blame, and offers to smuggle Garibaldi off the station back to Narn space, offering a position. Garibaldi turns down the offer. G'Kar does not reveal Garibaldi to security, and the security chief eventually is cleared. As the highest-ranking member of his faith on the station, it falls to G'Kar to hold a particular religious ceremony during the Days of G'Quan. The ceremony requires the use of a G'Quan Nth plant, a now rare plant almost eradicated by the Centauri occupation, and it has to be performed at a precise time. G'Kar, mindful of the responsibilities he has to his religious community, made arrangements months in advance to acquire the plant. However, because of an incident in the docking bay, the ship carrying the plant to G'Kar is destroyed. G'Kar asks Na'Toth to locate another. She is successful, but the only one available is being held by Londo Mollari. The Centauri ambassador first taunts G'Kar, then offers to sell it to him for the outrageous sum of 50,000 Earth credits. G'Kar manages to come up with the money, but Mollari rebuffs him, telling him he'd rather burn the plant instead. He also mentions that this is part of his revenge for Ragash III. After cooling his rage, G'Kar appeals to Commander Sinclair, who is in the middle of a dock workers' strike. Sinclair agrees to speak with Mollari, but his appeal is unsuccessful. Desperate, G'Kar arranges for a statue of a Centauri god to be stolen from their temple. Sinclair forces Mollari and G'Kar to a meeting where he insists that the statue be returned. He also impounds the plant, though to G'Kar's dismay the time has already passed for the ceremony. Sinclair points out that the light from 12 years ago, the distance from the Narn homeworld to the station, would be arriving at the station in a few hours. G'Kar finds this suffices, and goes forward with the ceremony. When Mordin first comes on board Babylon 5, the first ambassador he visits is G'Kar, asking the Narn, "What do you want?" After pausing a moment, G'Kar replies bitterly that he wants the Centauri completely wiped out. When Mordin asks what does he want after that, G'Kar replies that he has never thought that far ahead. Evidently disappointed at the answer, Mordin leaves and G'Kar dismisses the incident as foolishness. As the Earth year comes to a close, the Narn again are engaged in aggressive moves against the Centauri. This time, they wish to force the Centauri into abandoning all claims to Quadrant 37. As the Babylon 5 Council makes little progress, Sinclair tries appealing to G'Kar directly in his quarters. He warns G'Kar that the Narns are at a crossroads. Shortly thereafter, the Narn outpost in Quadrant 37 is mysteriously wiped out, with all 10,000 Narns killed. When G'Kar learns of the attack from Natuth, he realizes instantly it is not the work of the Centauri or any other one of the known races, but rather an unknown one. On the day of Earth President Luis Santiago's death, G'Kar leaves the station to investigate the new enemy. G'Kar quickly realized that the attack on the Narn outpost can only have been done by a new race, or a very old one. He spends many weeks searching along the Outer Rim, discovering something was moving, gathering its forces. on dark and distant worlds that should have been lifeless. He quietly returns to Babylon 5 after the rest of his expedition is wiped out. Na'Toth immediately notices a change in him, and he replies that he has stared into the abyss and has been altered. He calls for a meeting of the Security Council in an attempt to warn them that all of their races stand on the edge of extinction. Ambassador Mollari rebukes his claims, and G'Kar admits even the regime is skeptical, as G'Kar has no real proof. He has been able, however, to convince his government to send a warship to a planet far out on the rim, Z'ha'dum, which is supposed to be completely lifeless. However, the ship is destroyed as soon as it exits hyperspace, which the regime attributes as an accident. G'Kar suspects Mollari may have somehow sent a warning, but lacking proof, he can do nothing. Part of G'Kar's conclusions are drawn from his faith in the Book of G'Quan, which tells about an ancient enemy 1,000 years ago from the darkest corners of space that was so powerful it nearly overwhelmed the stars themselves. When a human cryo ship arrives at the station, it brings with it a malicious, invisible creature that begins to terrorize the station. G'Kar is deeply interested when members of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds mention rumors and stories from their own histories about an ancient terror. The description of the creature also conforms to the writings from the Book of G'Quan. G'Kar is invited to Mollari's Day of Ascension ceremony. All guests at the event are required to be barefoot, so G'Kar purposely wears boots in order to convey an insult. Mollari, however, is in far too good of a mood to be bothered by his rival, and laughs about not being insulted at all by his Narn friend. Mollari nearly dies when an old Centauri artifact given to him as a gift by his third wife, Mariel, ends up being an old booby trap. While Mariel protests her ignorance of it, G'Kar, who has had an ongoing affair with her, quickly realizes that she did intend to murder her husband, but agrees not to be a rumor monger. He warns Mariel that if he can figure it out, so can Mollari. Despite his ailing health, Centauri Emperor Turin wishes to come to Babylon 5. G'Kar angrily confronts Sheridan about such a visit, declaring Turan is a monster and a criminal for the crimes his family has committed during the Centauri occupation. G'Kar states it is merely a technicality, that Turan himself actually did nothing during the occupation. Sheridan states he will not consider G'Kar's request, eager for the Centauri Emperor to come. He encourages G'Kar to see this as an opportunity to open up a dialogue, but G'Kar storms out. Instead of a dialogue, G'Kar plots an assassination of the Emperor. He quietly contacts his government, which secretly goes along with the plan, telling him to strike during the official reception before the Emperor can deliver his intended speech. G'Kar dictates his last will and testament, declaring he is taking the action without knowledge or approval of the regime, or Na'Toth. He puts the rest of his affairs in order, leaving his copy of the Book of G'Quan to Na'Toth, in the hopes of her eventual conversion. Slipping a dagger into his glove, he goes to the reception and plans to strike. However, Turan suffers a major heart attack after he arrives on the station, but before he can reach the reception. As G'Kar hopes, Turan may recover enough for him to finish him off. He receives a visit from Dr. Stephen Franklin. The doctor is there with a message from Turan, given to Franklin to ensure that it would be delivered. Expecting a threat, G'Kar is taken back when Franklin tells him that the Emperor has come there to apologize in person to the Narn for everything that he has done against them by his people, and especially his family. He has come to admit that they were wrong and hope for a new era of peace. G'Kar is overwhelmed. He seeks out Mollari, finding him in the Zocalo, and insists having a drink with him. G'Kar buys them both a drink and toasts to the health of the Emperor, and to Mollari's own health, much to the shock of Mollari himself. Unfortunately, the hope for peace dies before the Emperor. An all-out attack on the Narn colony of Quadrant 14 suddenly occurs. The first transmissions are confused, but a follow-up expedition confirms the destruction of the military outposts and the presence of the Centauri ships securing the planet. The regime sends word to G'Kar on an open channel, allowing everyone to pick it up, including the CNC. G'Kar, correctly guessing Mollari knew about the attack, even as he drank with him in the Zocalo, is thrown into a rage. He injures several security guards on his way to Mollari's quarters. Before he can get there, he is confronted by Sheridan and a team of armed security guards. Sheridan insists G'Kar stand down, and after his rage almost overwhelms him, G'Kar collapses in sorrow. He spends the next several hours in meditation prior to a meeting of the full Babylon 5 assembly. At the assembly, G'Kar relays a message that the regime has officially declared war against the Centauri Republic. The war quickly goes against the Narn regime, due to their initial losses before the war and their lack of support among the other races. The Narn quickly find themselves on the defensive. The Centauri are merciless in their attacks. G'Kar appeals to Sheridan for the Earth Alliance to get involved, believing that if Earth takes a stand, other races will follow. He also makes an emotional appeal to Delenn, saying that he will beg if he has to for the Minbari to provide aid. Delenn tells G'Kar that his people's actions in the past make it difficult for anyone to trust their word now. She also states that her people are tired of war. Meanwhile, tension among the Narn population is growing. One Narn is shot and killed by a station security officer after he had been attacked by a Centauri. G'Kar confronts Sheridan, who tells G'Kar he is going to do what he can to convince Earth to support the Narns, but he needs G'Kar to keep his people in control. G'Kar appeals to the Narn on the station, but some of the younger ones believe he does not have the stomach for war. Despite his orders, they murder the Centauri, who had attacked the now dead Narn, and plan a massacre of all Centauri on the station. Fortunately, Na'Toth learns of their plans and warns G'Kar. He confronts the leader of the group, telling him that he has challenged his own leadership and there must be a fight. The two engage in hand-to-hand combat, with G'Kar emerging victorious. The other Narn stands down. The defeated Narn manages to injure G'Kar with a poisoned dagger, but G'Kar is able to treat the wound and the poison. G'Kar then receives word from Sheridan asking for a meeting. To his disappointment, he learns that the Earth Alliance will not get involved. However, Sheridan and Delenn have both promised to provide secret aid in the form of food and medical supplies, in addition to smuggling civilians out of hostile areas. G'Kar thanks them for what aid they are giving, but once alone breaks down weeping over the plight of his people. The station itself becomes a minor battleground in the war when the Narn and Centauri merchant ships open fire on one another, requiring the station's fighters to subdue them. G'Kar announces that the Centauri have violated the peace of Babylon 5 by smuggling weapons through it, a claim that the Centauri deny. G'Kar agrees to an interview by Cynthia Torxman, an ISN reporter who is doing a segment on Babylon 5. He talks about the Centauri occupation and his own personal history. He also denies a report that the Narn have lost 6 of their last 7 battles, as Centauri propaganda. Another skirmish appears in orbit when a Narn ship attacks a Centauri battlecruiser, leading to the destruction of both. The Narn continue to be pushed back over the next several months. G'Kar is visited by his uncle, who tells him that they have lost all their holdings in 3 key sectors. Confused, G'Kar asks why he has heard none of this in his daily briefings. Justin explains that the Ka'ri is perpetrating the myth that the regime is holding its own. He tells G'Kar of a desperate plan the regime has come up with to slow the Centauri advance. They will assemble the bulk of their remaining forces to an all-out attack of the Centauri supply line of the world Gorash 7. Capture of this planet will force the Centauri to halt, prolonging the war indefinitely and allowing the Narn to regroup and rebuild their defenses. G'Kar points out the danger of the plan. The Narn homeworld will be left with only a skeletal defense. Justin acknowledges the danger, but proceeds anyways, feeling that they have no choice, bidding his nephew farewell. G'Kar is contacted by Dr. Franklin and asked to come to the med lab. A transport of injured Narn civilians have recently arrived from one of the fallen colonies. Franklin tells G'Kar that the survivors only escaped because the Centauri pulled out before they were finished securing the planet, something highly atypical of the Centauri. A few Narns had been interrogated by Centauri officers regarding the Narn defenses. G'Kar assesses that the Centauri must be planning on attacking the homeworld far sooner than they had expected. He contacts Justin, begging him to return the fleet, but Justin is not convinced by the evidence and proceeds with the operation. G'Kar prays long and desperate, fearing the inevitable. The attack is a complete failure, leading to a total loss of the fleet. Soon thereafter, a massive Centauri strike force does indeed attack Narn itself, quickly overrunning its orbital defenses and beginning the orbital bombardment with mass drivers. Millions died over the course of the next few days, and most of the planet's infrastructure collapses. The regime had no choice but to surrender. Their last order is for G'Kar to seek sanctuary on Babylon 5. Overwhelmed with emotion, G'Kar slowly seeks out Captain Sheridan and makes the request. News of the bombing initially sparks riots on Babylon 5, prompting a lockdown of the station. Ambassador Mollari, off station the entire time, finally returns and asks for a meeting of the Babylon 5 assembly. The Security Council and the League quickly convene. Mollari announces that the Narn have offered a total and unconditional surrender to the Centauri Republic. He announces the terms of the war, which includes the formal stripping of G'Kar's rank as ambassador and call for his return to Narn to stand trial with the rest of the Kari. Captain Sheridan announces he has granted G'Kar's sanctuary, and the move is supported by Delenn and the Minbari Federation. Mollari grudgingly acknowledges that he cannot override their decision, but rather angrily insists G'Kar leave the council. G'Kar slowly stands up, but before he leaves, he speaks one last time. No dictator, no invader can hold an imprisoned population by force of arms forever. There is no greater power in the universe than the need for freedom. Against that power, governments and tyrants and armies cannot stand. The Centauri learned this lesson once. We will teach it to them again. Though it take 1,000 years, we will be free. G'Kar, 2259. While no longer enjoying his ambassadorial status, G'Kar continues to remain in a position of authority on the station, acting as a leader of the Narn community, liaison to the station administration, and as the only member of the Kari still free, de facto leader of the Narn government in exile. G'Kar soon gets to work doing his part for the Narn resistance. He makes arrangements with the arms dealer named Mr. Chase to purchase weapons to be used, purchased with the life savings of the free Narns. Initially, he begins smuggling weapons through the station, but Security Chief Michael Garibaldi quickly catches on. In exchange for G'Kar promising to discontinue smuggling there, Garibaldi gives him information on an alternate and much safer route. Despite this, many of the Narn on the station begin to question G'Kar's position as leader. He approaches Garibaldi for help, and Garibaldi is able to have the Rangers smuggle a data crystal out of Narn containing messages from the family of the Narn on the station. This is enough to renew the Narn's loyalty to G'Kar. G'Kar also refuses to remain silent. He takes to appealing to the humans and the aliens in the Zocalo, loudly proclaiming that the Centauri war machine will surely press onward. One of the ones who actually listens to him is Firkado, Mollari's Ashate, who apologizes to G'Kar for what had happened. Nearly blind with rage, G'Kar tells him that until he can find a way to apologize to the dead, he cannot forgive. A Narn warship that escaped destruction in the war jumps into Babylon 5 space. They request sanctuary, and Sheridan agrees to the request, even as Frederick Lance, a representative from EarthGov, is there to investigate the Centauri situation. G'Kar is informed of both pieces of information and hopes that Earth will stand up to the Centauri. Unfortunately, Lance refuses to meet with G'Kar and is dismayed when he is tipped off about the presence of the Narn ship. Lance announces that Earth is prepared to sign a non-aggression treaty with the Republic, something that virtually everyone on the station perceives as akin to appeasement. A Centauri battlecruiser arrives demanding the custody of the Narn ship. Sheridan refuses, providing a fighter wing to escort the Narn ship safely away. The Centauri open fire on the station, causing heavy damage before being destroyed by the station's defenses. Sheridan is expected to make a formal apology to the Centauri. He reluctantly agrees to do so. Later, G'Kar is present in the Zen Garden as Sheridan travels in the core shuttle. A pair of Centauri place a bomb in the compartment, and in desperation Sheridan jumps out of the shuttle, weightless but falling towards the station. Suddenly, a being of light appears and saves Sheridan. Every race perceives the being differently. G'Kar and the other Narn behold Jalan, an angelic-like being in the visage of a Narn. Many people on board view this as a divine sign that Babylon 5 is a blessed place. G'Kar, however, can only think of the now unopposed Centauri war machine and the shadows. When Lieutenant Warren Keffer is killed in hyperspace at the very end of 2259, he manages to send a probe with a few seconds of an image of a shadow vessel. Earth Force Special Intelligence sends David and Dowie to see if anyone on Babylon 5 knows about the ship. While he is not supposed to officially speak with the Narn, Garibaldi convinces him to talk to G'Kar anyways. G'Kar shows in Dowie the Book of Jaquan, specifically a drawing of a ship that matches the shadow vessel exactly. He explains that the shadows came to Narn 1,000 years ago, and that Jaquan perceived them to be engaged in some great war beyond the stars. He explains that he has been trying to warn everyone for a year, but no one will listen. The shadows have returned. Early in 2260, Babylon 5 is rocked by a series of bombings. G'Kar quickly assigns the blame to the Centauri. and they, of course, blame the Narn. One of the bombs causes severe damage, leaving G'Kar trapped with Mollari in an elevator. Mollari is knocked out for 2 hours, leaving G'Kar to assess the situation. He realizes that there's a fire burning beyond the lift, and that smoke will eventually come into the lift and kill them both. When Mollari awakens, he realizes this as well, and insists that they must work together to escape. G'Kar refuses, laughingly stating that he'd rather see Mollari dead than survive himself. This way, he will get to watch Mollari die, and he will not have to raise a finger. However, they are both rescued before they suffocate. And we'll try to be right back after this. Soon after the station has repaired the bombings, 2 Narns arrive. One of them is Counselor Nafar, who explains that he is there to replace G'Kar as leader of the Narns on the station. He states his belief that G'Kar is instrumental in organizing and promoting the resistance on Narn, something Nafar and others wanted stopped. Nafar states the time is not right, especially with the Centauri killing 500 Narns for every one of their own killed. Nafar tells G'Kar that many Narns are starving, and that the resistance is keeping the Narn on the homeworld from getting food sent by the Centauri. G'Kar tells him that they don't want the help of the Centauri, but Nafar says that Centauri food may be their only chance for survival. G'Kar explodes, telling Nafar that he isn't responsible for the Narn invasion and he doesn't want to be blamed for those problems. G'Kar insists that the resistance is working to secure their own food and resources, but Nafar despairs that they will never be able to bring in enough. G'Kar says that the Centauri are simply trying to control them, a fact to which Nafar concedes, but insists that the time for action is not yet at hand. Nafar begs G'Kar to postpone his battle against the Centauri and return home, while Nafar looks after things on Babylon 5. G'Kar says the other Narns on Babylon 5 will not accept Nafar, and therefore he must stay. But Nafar tells him that the Centauri will persecute and imprison their families if he remains. Nafar and his guard Talon leave G'Kar's quarters and are immediately accosted by some of the members of G'Kar's resistance, who insist that he is merely a puppet of the Centauri government, designed to carry out their will on Babylon 5. A fight nearly breaks out but is interrupted by G'Kar, who stops them and tells them they cannot succeed if they fight amongst themselves. If the only way to solve these problems is to return to Narn, he agrees to do so. As G'Kar prepares to leave the station, he is stopped by many Narns who insist that G'Kar is valued and needed on the station. He reminds them that their families may be in jeopardy, but they all realize this and are ready to accept what happens if it means the freedom of all Narns. Even Talon has been convinced to stay and join the Narn resistance, and tells G'Kar that only with his help can they eventually succeed. G'Kar agrees to stay on board. And we should be right back after this. G'Kar hears rumors about the Rangers and suspects Sheridan and Delenn are working together on putting together a new alliance. They repeatedly duck his inquiries. When Garibaldi assures him that he cannot say anything at the time being, G'Kar replies by giving him his copy of the Book of G'Quan, telling him to read it. Seeking to find new ways to help the Narn resistance, G'Kar makes contact with a human drug smuggler to buy dust, a drug that allows non-telepaths to acquire temporary telepathic abilities. Unsure if the drug will work on Narns, but mindful that 1,000 years before, there were Narn telepaths, G'Kar decides to test the drug on himself. The drug works, but leaves him partially delirious. He seeks out Mollari, finding him and Vir Kato in Mollari's quarters. He knocks out Kato and drags Mollari to a quiet location and down below, severely beating him in the process. G'Kar then is able to penetrate Mollari's mind, learning many of his secrets, including the fact that it was Mollari who had been at the center of events leading to the war. Trying to learn more about Mordin and his associates, G'Kar is quickly overwhelmed by the flood of images and feelings. At his lowest point, he has a vision of his father, who speaks to him about the need for change. He warns G'Kar that the Narn are in danger of extinction, and that they must let go of their hatred and the cycle of death with the Centauri, as it will only lead to the death of both sides. He speaks about the oncoming Shadow War and the need for the Narn to be prepared to sacrifice themselves honorably if there's any hope for anyone to survive what is coming. G'Kar comes out of the effects of the drugs and breaks down in tears over the experience. He fails to observe Kosh nearby, who quietly withdraws without saying anything. Afterwards, he surrenders himself to station security and pleads guilty to the attack. He is sentenced to no less than 60 days in station lockup. He declines Garibaldi's offer to take back the Book of Jaquan, saying he believes he is now closer to the source. G'Kar spent the next several weeks confined to his own cell. His only visitor during this time was Mr. Garibaldi, who marveled at how peaceful G'Kar seemed. G'Kar explained that in confinement, he could not hide from himself. He spent his days meditating, thinking, and even singing, drawing numerous complaints from those who could hear. He also began writing his thoughts down in a book, which would eventually be known as the Book of G'Kar. He first thought he could have it finished by the time he was released. When the Earth Alliance declares martial law, G'Kar is released early due to the chaos. He finds Talon has been keeping vigil outside his quarters since his imprisonment began. G'Kar explains the revelation he has had, how the Narns must be willing to sacrifice themselves by the millions if necessary in order to save the universe itself. He also explains that the key to this is Babylon 5, and it must be protected. He appeals to the Narn community for help, and they agree to follow and do whatever he asks. When the command staff is forced to lock up roughly half its security personnel who are operating through Night Watch, G'Kar offers the Narns living on the station as replacement security officers. Sheridan accepts the offer. G'Kar then insists on being brought in on the new alliance he knows is being formed, and Sheridan agrees to do so as soon as he is able. That event is delayed, however, when Babylon 5 is forced to declare independence from the Earth Alliance, when President Morgan Clark dissolves the Senate and orders the bombing of civilian targets on Mars. At the same time, half of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds has gone to war with the other half. A full battle occurs at Babylon 5. The station is only saved when Ambassador Delenn returns on board the White Star, with 4 Charlene-class Minbari warships right behind her. Later, G'Kar was eager to prove the value of his fellow Narns in their new position. When approached by Delenn and asked to be part of the Minbari rebirth ceremony, he declines, stating that he is far too busy with his new responsibilities. While dedicated to the new war, G'Kar did not forget the Centauri occupation. He kept arranging for messages to be smuggled off of Narn from families of the Narn on board the station. While picking up one of these deliveries, he stumbled across a strange human claiming to be King Arthur, who at the time was confronting an entire gang of thugs who were terrorizing innocent people in Down Below. G'Kar joined Arthur, and they successfully routed the gang. Afterwards, they went to a tavern to drink heavily, celebrating their victory against the ruffians who would prey on the weak. They also discussed their respective histories, with Arthur telling G'Kar the story of the Battle of Camelin. King Arthur then knights the Narn as Sir G'Kar, the Red Knight, just before G'Kar passes out from too much drink. After Arthur remembers his true self, David McIntyre, G'Kar offers him a place of honor in the Narn resistance. He arranges for McIntyre to reach Narn, seeing him off from the docking bay. And we should be right back after this. Many weeks would pass without Sheridan making good on his promise, frustrating G'Kar. Sheridan, busy with the mission off station, approached Delenn to discuss bringing G'Kar in. She then insisted on telling G'Kar the whole truth herself. Delenn invites G'Kar over to her quarters and explains everything to him. The history of the First Shadow War, the prophecies regarding their return, and the knowledge she, Kosh, and the Grey Council had about their return, even as the Shadows were assisting the Centauri during the war. She explains that they spoke out when G'Kar spoke out with his warnings. The only thing that would have changed is that the Shadows would have become aware of their knowledge, tipping their hand, and Narn would have been obliterated entirely rather than decimated, and that billions more across the galaxy would have died. G'Kar is devastated to hear that Delenn knew this all along. He explains that had he learned what she had just told him about the bombing of Narn, he would have surely killed her. He recalls the words from his dream again, and realizes that the words about sacrifice pertain to the past as well as the future. G'Kar concedes that nothing would be different, and Delenn remarks on how changed G'Kar has been. She tells him that she hopes that he will one day forgive her. and he admits it will not be soon. Later, Delenn brings G'Kar formally into the new War Council, showing him the new war room recently built on the station. She promises that there will be no more distrust between them. That same night, Mr. Garibaldi calls G'Kar, Delenn, Sheridan, and Ivanova into the war room, explaining that he has uncovered a crucial key to the victory in the upcoming conflict. He asks G'Kar to read from the Book of G'Quan, which speaks of G'Quan and the last of the Narn telepaths driving the Shadows off Narn during the First Shadow War. The Council realizes the telepaths may be the Shadows' one Achilles heel. Even as they do, however, a report comes in that Shadows are attacking races openly. The Second Shadow War has fully begun. Needing ships to aid in the defense of the station, Sheridan and G'Kar invite the J'tak to come to the station. G'Kar meets with Nakaal and discusses postponing an open strike against the Centauri. When Sheridan seeks to test their theory regarding the Shadow's vulnerability to telepathy, G'Kar asks Nakaal to have the J'tak provide escort to the White Star. Nakaal refuses, feeling it is surely a suicide mission and not wishing to risk one of the few Narn vessels still functioning. After Sheridan embarks on the mission, Garibaldi comes to G'Kar while he sleeps, angrily confronting him about not forcing Nakaal to go forward. He returns the Book of G'Quan and tells him that the responsibility lies with G'Kar. Accepting what Garibaldi has said, G'Kar convinces not only Nakaal but a host of other League members to mount a small fleet and rescue Sheridan. And we should be right back after this. Having proven telepaths can affect the Shadows, the newly christened Army of Light begins taking telepath volunteers, assigning them to all the races in the Alliance, to help fight back against the Shadows, now battling every race across known space. G'Kar offers to send one Narn bodyguard along to protect the telepaths. Londo Mollari approaches G'Kar at this time, offering him a chance for revenge. He provides him with evidence that Antano Rifa was the one who orchestrated the bombardment of Narn, established death camps and genetic cleansing programs, and other means that have resulted in the deaths of millions of Narns. Mollari explains that Rifa is a mutual enemy and wants G'Kar's help in killing Rifa. As an added incentive, he arranges 2,000 Narns currently in custody to be freed. The plan involves trapping Rifa by having it appear G'Kar has returned to Narn to rescue N'Toth, still missing ever since the bombings. G'Kar arranges through Mr. Garibaldi to have himself smuggled onto the planet by the Rangers. He is dismayed when he sees how much his world has changed. Meeting up with a dozen members of the Narn Resistance, he leads them into the tunnels beneath the ruins of the old Capitol building. They meet Rifa and a cadre of guards. Rifa learns what has happened when G'Kar plays a message from Mollari. The guards, loyal to Mollari, leave. G'Kar places a data crystal in Rifa's pocket and asks that his face be left intact so it can be identified. Rifa tries to flee but is seized and beaten to death by the other Narn. G'Kar watches only for a moment before walking away. He leaves the planet immediately afterwards. Once back on Babylon 5, G'Kar arranges for a shipment of 500,000 megaton nuclear bombs to be delivered by the game in order to be used against the Shadows. A few days later, after Sheridan leaves for Z'ha'dum itself, an armada of Shadow vessels arrive on the station. Even as they do, G'Kar is checking on the nuclear devices and discovers 2 are missing. He rushes to CNC to inform Commander Ivanova, who contemplates detonating them, even if it means taking them out along with the enemy. However, the Shadows withdraw mysteriously without attacking. G'Kar and Ivanova both realize it likely means Sheridan is dead. Over the next week, G'Kar watched as the Army of Light slowly began to dissolve. Word came that Sheridan had perished in the thermonuclear attack on Z'ha'dum, and the Shadows had completely withdrawn. The League members decided to withdraw their ships back to their respective states to bolster their own defenses. G'Kar, Delenn, and Commander Ivanova were unsuccessful in persuading them to remain. Feeling useless, G'Kar decided to seek out Michael Garibaldi, still missing when his Star Fury vanished, seeing Garibaldi as the only non-Narn friend he truly had. Jakar felt obliged to find out what had happened to him. Jakar was able to track down Garibaldi's Star Fury, which had been picked up and sold as salvage by a human trader. He found the trader on a small, remote human colony. The scavenger, however, refused to speak to Jakar, and a bar fight broke out. Jakar was assisted by Marcus Cole, a ranger, who had pursued Jakar, figuring he would need some backup. The two fought their way out of the bar and found a hiding place. Marcus sought out the trader on his own and managed to get a name, which he brought back to Jakar. While grateful, Jakar explained to Marcus that his search is a personal one and would prefer to do it on his own. Marcus reluctantly leaves Jakar behind and returns to Babylon 5. After Marcus left, Centauri guards find Jakar's hiding place as he sleeps. He tries to fight, but is shot with a stun gun and captured. He is then brought to Centauri Prime in chains, dragged before Emperor Cartagia in the royal palace, and presented as a gift to Londo Mollari, now the Minister of Planetary Security. Jakar's only concern is to ask if they know where Garibaldi might be, but neither Cartagia nor Mollari have any idea. Later that day, Jakar rests, chained up in his small holding cell after a brutal torture session. Mollari comes to visit him. Mollari explains to Jakar in detail how he will continue to be tortured and eventually killed, and that he would never have wished this upon his enemy. Mollari then explains that Cartagia is mad, and that he needs Jakar's help in removing him. Jakar recognizes how desperate Mollari is, and issues the price for his help. His world must be set free. Mollari promises to make it happen. Despite giving Jakar to Mollari, Cartagia still sees fit to amuse himself by torturing Jakar. His amusement turns to frustration, however, when Jakar refuses to scream in pain. During one session, Cartagia is so angered he considers cutting off both Jakar's hands, but the Narn passes out before he can order the plan. While Jakar enjoys a brief respite from the torture, Mollari comes to him again, telling him that if he does not cry out, the Emperor will have him killed. Jakar, still clinging to his pride, tells Mollari this is one thing he cannot be made to do. Mollari reminds him that if he dies, there is no hope for his people's freedom. In the next session, Cartagia has Jakar tied to a post to receive lashes from a special whip known as the Electro Whip. The pain increases with each lash, and Cartagia explains that it will only end when Jakar screams, or the total reaches 40, which would be enough to kill him. Cartagia forces Mollari to watch. Jakar endures to the 39th stroke before crying out in anguish. And we'll be right back after this. Despite knowing it had to happen, the blow to Jakar's mentality is a strong one. He glares at Cartagia silently as the Emperor has him removed from his cell and prepares to board a ship. Mollari has convinced Cartagia to have Jakar's trial on the Narn homeworld itself. The Emperor is so unsettled by it that he asks Mollari for advice on how to deal with it. Preoccupied with his plans to assassinate Cartagia, Mollari unthinkingly tells him to do what he thinks is best. As a result, the Emperor orders one of his guards to pluck out one of Jakar's eyes, not caring initially, but choosing the left at the last minute. After arriving on Narn, Mollari visits Jakar in his cell, and is shocked to find that the Narn's left eye has been plucked out. Jakar tells Mollari that he sees things more clearly now, and that the Centauri's heart is empty. Mollari ignores Jakar's statement and explains that the Narn is to be paraded through the streets of the capital, and then into the palace, and before Cartagia. Mollari tells Jakar that everything is in place, and that he needs only break his chains, which have been weakened, and create enough of a disturbance for Mollari and his agents to assassinate Cartagia unhampered. He warns that if Jakar touches the Emperor, the Narn will never be free. Unknown to either Jakar or Mollari, the Emperor has ordered Jakar's weakened chains replaced. Despite this, despite having been beaten, tortured, starved, and made to carry a heavy beam across the city, Jakar finds the strength to break the chains. Other Narns have been brought to the palace to witness his trial, and they join him in creating a necessary distraction. Cartagia dies in what looks like a fatal heart attack. Mollari convinces what is left of the royal court that they should take it as a sign from the gods to abandon Narn. The other nobles agree, feeling that there is nothing there but ruins anyways. The Centauri announce that they will be withdrawing and begin to evacuate. Word sweeps across the planet. As the Centauri abandon the palace, a group of young Narns begin tearing up the throne in celebration. G'Kar wanders in and questions them. They tell him that they want him to be their next ruler and lead them in glorious revenge against the Centauri. G'Kar refuses to become a dictator and tells them that they have to let go of their desire for revenge. One of the Narns, Jalorn, calls him a coward, asking what he had endured during the occupation. G'Kar, blind in one eye and still covered in his injuries, merely walks out, caught between laughter and tears. Soon thereafterwards, Captain Sheridan, seemingly returned from the dead, manages to bring about the end of the Second Shadow War, following the Battle of Coryana 6. Presumably at this time the Ka-Ri is reinstated, at least in a basic manner, and G'Kar assumes his former place among them. G'Kar returns to Babylon 5 shortly thereafter, with the Shadow War over and the ancient enemy gone forever, along with the Vorlons and the rest of the first ones. Dr. Franklin treats G'Kar's eye, replacing it with a prosthetic one that can operate outside the body, amusing G'Kar greatly. Mollari soon arrives on the station. Having been appointed Prime Minister, Mollari decides that he wanted some distance from the capital, as many of Cartesia's supporters or other enemies of his might still be about. Leaving Centauri Prime in the care of the regent, G'Kar confronts him coldly, telling him that now that Narn is free, Mollari no longer exists in his world. G'Kar cannot so easily avoid Mollari completely, however. A month or two after the war is over, Captain Sheridan invites both men to a meeting. He explains about a few recent attacks by a mysterious race called the Drakh. Sheridan wants to keep all the races cooperating and working together, and asks G'Kar and Mollari to allow the Rangers to patrol their respective borders with the White Star Fleet. G'Kar is reluctant at first, but eventually agrees. In September 2261, Sheridan calls for an emergency session of the Council and the League to discuss the status of the Earth Alliance Civil War. With President Clark completely out of control, Sheridan and his allies have decided to strike back and liberate their home. Sheridan asked the Centauri, Narn, and the other races that might have mutual defense treaties with Earth to suspend them for the duration of the Civil War. G'Kar enthusiastically supports Sheridan's request, and all others present unanimously agree. Mollari decides to take it a step further. He meets with G'Kar in his quarters. Despite the cool reception he receives, Mollari candidly tells his one-time enemy that he no longer wishes to be trapped in the same old cycle. He wants to build something better. Recalling the drink that G'Kar brought him just before the Narn-Centauri War, Mollari offers G'Kar a drink and proposes that they shift from neutral party to rendering a more active assistance to Sheridan. G'Kar says nothing, only turns down the drink, making Mollari leave feeling disappointed. A few hours later, however, G'Kar meets him in the Zocalo, and does have a drink. He agrees to Mollari's proposal, but insists his name not be on the same page as Mollari when it's signed. When the Earth Alliance Civil War ends, G'Kar, along with the members of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds, agreed to the formation of a new interstellar alliance. G'Kar and the other League representatives travel to Earth to address the government and there offer them a chance to join the new organization. G'Kar himself speaks at a press conference alongside interim Earth President. G'Kar and Mollari are both present at the wedding of Sheridan and Delenn, and after the ceremony share a drink. During this, Mollari asks G'Kar how he feels about making history, to which G'Kar responds that you cannot hope to make history. You can only hope to survive it. Back on Babylon 5, G'Kar continues to function as a diplomatic representative for the Narn, while serving on the advisory board for the Alliance. He makes many contributions to the Alliance formation, including the Presidential Oath of Office and the Declaration of Principles. When Mollari is fighting for his life in Medlab after suffering a heart attack, G'Kar makes the surprising move of joining Cato as he keeps vigil at Mollari's bedside, after Mollari awakens to apologize profoundly to G'Kar, something he had never done before in all of his life. G'Kar is moved, but offers no response. And we'll be right back after this. During this time, G'Kar and Mollari unconsciously draw close together, despite their occasional barb exchange. For example, when the two take shelter together while Babylon 5 repels an attack from an unknown alien force, they share some intimate details about their respective childhoods. In 2262, Delenn asked G'Kar to act as a bodyguard for Londo Mollari when Mollari returns to his homeworld to prepare for the position of Emperor. She requested this not only to protect Mollari from the scheming nobles of the royal court, but also to serve as an important symbol that the two races that had once so hated each other could work together. But what really makes G'Kar agree to the idea is the anticipation of seeing the shocked reaction of the Centauri nobility at seeing a Narn in their midst. Despite outward prejudice from the members of the royal court, G'Kar stays at Mollari's side consistently on Centauri Prime, even sleeping in his room at the foot of his bed. Indeed, G'Kar proves to be an able bodyguard, saving Mollari at least once. While there, G'Kar was presented with the Electro Whip that was used on him along with the guard who wielded it, courtesy of Minister Vol, an enemy of Mollari's. Possibly to embarrass Mollari, Mol invites G'Kar to freely use the Electro Whip to avenge himself on the guard, but the Narn surprises everyone and impresses some when he declines the offer, stating that the guard was only acting on the orders of Cartagia, who is now dead. Later, while he and Mollari examine reports of increased military spending by the Centauri government, although they are not officially at war, G'Kar stops to wonder why fresh spoo, which can only be eaten by his own kind, is being sent to the unused underground cells of the royal palace. He discovers that his former diplomatic aide and friend Na'Toth is still alive after having been assumed dead during the Narn-Centauri War, is being held prisoner there. In short order, G'Kar and Mollari smuggle her out of the palace, disguised as a veiled Centauri noblewoman, and eventually transfer her to a Narn ship, on their way back to Babylon 5. After the pair arrive on the station, G'Kar receives a new artificial eye that is in the proper color. He also learns that the book of religious observations that he had been writing had been taken from his quarter by Talon, and subsequently published, much to G'Kar's surprise. As months pass, G'Kar becomes a spiritual figure, with many Narns coming to him for guidance. Although uncomfortable in this role, he does his best to help those around him understand his message of unity. G'Kar again becomes a bodyguard when Mollari returns to Centauri Prime to investigate Centauri attacks on Alliance shipping lanes. Delenn warns G'Kar that the Alliance blockade and boycott of Centauri ships would soon develop into war, and that if G'Kar ran into trouble, no one would be sent to help him. Regardless of Delenn's concerns, G'Kar leaves. Once he is on the Centauri homeworld, G'Kar is quickly locked in a cell over Mollari's objections. Mollari goes so far as to have himself incarcerated with G'Kar, as repayment for his loyal service and testament to their fledgling friendship. G'Kar is injured when Centauri Prime comes under global bombardment, but is saved by Mollari much to his surprise. Just before Mollari is to have a Drakh Keeper attached to him and become Centauri Emperor, G'Kar forgives him for his past deeds and bids him goodbye. G'Kar's spiritual following continues to grow. His seemingly miraculous survival on Centauri Prime threatens to turn the movement into a full-scale cult of personality. Even the Kari are swept up, demanding that he return to Narn for his blessing or more. Horrified by these developments, G'Kar realizes that he needs to put some distance between himself and the mythos that is building around him. At the same time, Lyta Alexander is captured for financial terrorist activities on behalf of the Telepath Resistance. This and her increasing powers have made her a greater threat the longer she remains on board Babylon 5. As G'Kar prepares to leave, he offers to take Alexander with him as a traveling companion, believing that he can help Alexander heal her anger and encourage her to move on to something better. She eventually accepts, and he arranges to have Talon take over his duties as Narn representative on Babylon 5. And we'll be right back after this. G'Kar and Alexander eventually part ways, and G'Kar returns to Alliance space. G'Kar's exact duties within the Alliance during these years are not known. It is known that he helps a group of Rangers with a rescue mission and participates in a diplomatic conference at Babylon 5. In 2271, on a visit to Babylon 5, G'Kar learns that Stephen Franklin is there purchasing a small explorer vessel, with the intent of exploring worlds out on the rim. Not one to miss an opportunity to venture into the unknown, G'Kar invites himself along as Franklin's traveling companion. In 2275, G'Kar is on Centauri Prime using a changeling net to disguise his appearance, when at a public address attended by Emperor Mollari and Prime Minister Durla, he foils an attempt on the Prime Minister's life. To save him from being executed as an off-world spy, and in gratitude for saving Durla's life, G'Kar is made a guest of the royal palace. In December 2278, on the last day of his life, Mollari reveals the keeper on his neck to G'Kar and his plan to free Sheridan and Delenn. At Mollari's request, G'Kar attempts to kill him as an act of mercy. After Sheridan and Delenn are escorted to an awaiting ship by a guard, Mollari asks, "Are you there, my old friend?" G'Kar emerges from the shadows. The two exchange a few words, and then G'Kar begins to strangle Mollari. Mollari's sleeping keeper awakens and forces the elderly emperor to choke G'Kar. Both die at each other's hands. After the Centauri Republic is liberated from the Drakh, Cato, having succeeded Mollari as emperor, has two large gold statues of Mollari and G'Kar placed at the gates of the capital city, positioned so as they appear to be watching each other's backs. In 2281, as Sheridan's life draws to a close, he and Delenn hold one last private dinner with Cato, Franklin, Garibaldi, and Ivanova, as they toast the memories of those from their days on Babylon 5 who have passed away. Garibaldi names G'Kar. Thank you for watching the history of Babylon 5. This concludes the history of G'Kar. Special thanks to the Babylon Project and all contributors for all information you heard today. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you can. If you have, thank you. And have a nice day. Bye-bye.